It's Emil Guillermo. Emil Amok to you. This is Emil Amok's Takeout. My takes on all things considerable, I say. The micro talk show, the AAPI, the AAXs. And if you're not an Asian American, Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian, or an Asian American X, a Filipino, Japanese, a Hmong, a Hindu, an Indian, whatever your AAX is, well, you're certainly an ALL. Well, we do this thing in English. You can understand. We're not trying to bar communication. Welcome to the program. This is the program I do here, Emil Muck's Takeout, where I answer the question. Well, let's see. I answer the question, what dad? What does an Asian American think? Because no one asks. But I ask, and I'll just ask myself, and I'll tell you right here. We fill the void, or make that I fill the void here on Emil Amok's Takeout. This is show number 174. We're here Monday through Friday between 2 p.m. Pacific and whenever. Ideally, it's like the first segment of a talk show where you. And I've done talk shows in San Francisco, Boston, Sacramento, Washington, D.C. And, the thing is, that first segment, that's where the talk show host polarizes and riles people up and gets people to get on the phones. And that was the thought, that I was just going to do that for the first segment. But there's just so much to talk about that no one asks Asian Americans. And it's an opportunity to give you my perspective, give you a perspective from an Asian American. Sometimes moderate, sometimes progressive, sometimes more progressive, sometimes less progressive. Never, ever really conservative. But, maybe a little bit. Maybe that's where the moderation comes in. Because, I am a Libra. So, we're balanced. We're balanced folks. So, show 174, what are we going to talk about today? Oh, lots of things. I got Professor Dan Gonzalez coming in. College of Ethnic Studies, San Francisco State, Asian American political science guy. We're going to talk about more about the elections and Democratic messaging and the Build Back Cheaper plan. That's what I call it. I wish it was Build Back Better, but then it would have to be like $6 trillion. But we're Build Back Cheaper because they're cutting it down to like between 175 and 185 or 1.85 trillion. Boy, 185 trillion. I don't want to give you a heart attack. 1.85. And we'll talk about the votes that they're still negotiating at this hour. As we speak, they may be voting tonight because they so desperately want to show the American public that they're doing something. So we're going to talk about that with Professor Dan in a second. The Powell funeral, going to talk about that. Got to talk about the Powell, the general's funeral today. Did you watch that? It was on all the channels. You could not get away from watching that. It was almost like you half to expect that, oh, well, he's going to come out and give us a report on the Gulf War. No. But you remember, that's how that was his claim to fame, right? He was the debriefer. Him and Schwarzkopf, that's how he became the guy. And then everyone wondered, well, is he going to run for president? Are going to make it like a U.S. Grant kind of thing? And then, of course, in 95, he said no, he wouldn't do it. Because it's one thing to be a salutant general. It's another thing. And also, in terms of the scrutiny you get as a military officer. Well, they pretty much take your life. You don't have a life in the military, really. But can you imagine it's worse if you're commander in chief? And that's what the choice was. And he couldn't do it. Didn't want to do it. Didn't want to sacrifice his family. He also didn't have the infrastructure to go to go for the presidency. So he didn't. maybe it was a good move because it would have saved him from the other thing that was a problem. That thing, well, when he couldn't be the president, he had to work for a president and he had to be Secretary of State and he had to make really the speech that he called the blot on his career, the speech that justified the Iraq War, where General Powell, then Secretary of State Powell, had to carry water for George W. Bush, for Cheney, for Rumsfeld, for that whole pro-war cabal that was leading the country into a war that we never should have been in. But they used Powell. Isn't that funny? Powell was their human shield. So that ran through my head through the entire funeral. I mean, I love funerals. I mean, if you're Filipino, you go to funerals all the time, or at least it seemed like I did throughout my life, because there are a lot of old Filipinos, and I was into it. I mean, I was into the pomp, the ceremony, here's the soldiers, they're the pallbearers, they're bringing in the body. They're at the National Cathedral in Washington, a great place. I've never been there for something like this, but I felt like watching it on television from 3,000 miles away. I felt like I was there. And that whole thing about 2003 was in my mind as I saw them put the casket into the cathedral, as I saw the eulogies one by one. They were good. They were fun. Armitage, the assistant secretary to Powell, they were good buddies. And some people said, I heard one commentator say, "Oh, that was a kind of it was a sort of unpolished but great because it was real, because it was authentic." Okay, yeah. But maybe that was the only one. Because the rest of them were they were real, but they were reminded that they were at a funeral. And they weren't going to tell the honest to God truth. Right? That's really politics, right? I mean, you don't always hear the truth at a funeral. You save that. You save that for maybe another time. And you have the good taste to just say nice things. But I'm going to get to that point. The eulogy that struck me the most was Michael Powell. Michael Powell, the son of Colin Powell, who in his eulogy recalled how he was having a hard time. Michael Powell was having a hard time with the press when he was head of the FCC. And he called his father and asked him if he should quit. This was his response. Here's his response.
Yeah. The response was swift. Powell's don't quit.
Powell's don't quit. That's what he said about what his dad said. Here's to continue.
People will long forget the issues you're dealing with. They will never forget how you conduct yourself.
This was a lesson that Michael Powell shared in the eulogy about his dad. What his dad said to him: don't quit. Powell's don't quit. People will long forget the issues you're dealing with. They will never forget how you conduct yourself. You know, I wonder if Colin Powell is wherever he is. I'm not making a judgment as to where he is right now. We know he's passed on. But if he heard his son today, would he say that he did the right thing in 2003 when he went up before the UN Security Council and said, Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Because in Michael Powell's words that his father said, people will long forget the issues you're dealing with. Well, we haven't. They will never forget how you conducted yourself. Well, we haven't forgotten. There he was, essentially lying. Because he said Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. Did he? No, he didn't. Now, maybe he had some cover. He could blame faulty U.S. intelligence. He should have known. And if he did know, or if he was later corrected, could he have stopped that moving train that justified the Iraq War? Because if he was a good guy, he would have. People will long forget the issues you're dealing with. No, they haven't. They will never forget how you conducted yourself. Well, he conducted himself like a Secretary of State who was a former general. And he saluted the commander-in-chief, George W. Bush, and all his folks, who said, we got to go in. We got to go into Iraq. And that was one of the takeaways I got from watching the service today. Yeah, I mean, it was sad. Sad to watch, essentially the Episcopal Mass, right? No communion, but they had the readings and they had the eulogies. That one thing stuck out of Michael Powell's eulogy for his dad, plus the fact that he said his dad loved mechanical adding machines. That was is that neat? I don't know if you call that neat. It's just a thing you don't know about General Powell. But here's one other clip I want to play. This is Michael Powell again. He talks about the difference between resume values and eulogy values. Let's see here.
Resume virtues and eulogy virtues.
Okay, resume virtues and eulogy virtues. This is Michael Powell talking in reference to his dad.
Resume virtues are your achievements and your skills. Eulogy virtues are those discussed at your funeral, the ones that exist at the core of your being, whether you are kind, brave, honest, or faithful. This person has a quiet but solid sense of right and wrong, not only to do good, but to be good.
Think about that. Not only to do good, but to be good. But think about that. This is Michael K. Powell talking about his dad.
He wants to love intimately, to sacrifice self in the service of others, and to live in obedience to some transcendent trust.
The transcendent trust. Could that be George W. Bush?
That was my father. The example of Colin Powell does not call on us to emulate his resume, which is too formidable for mere mortals.
That I agree. He had an impeccable resume. From the South Bronx to City College in New York to 4-star general. Impeccable. To Secretary of State. He was Joint Chiefs of Staff, right? Chair of that. He was Secretary. Just an abundance of firsts. Barrier after barrier. Is this enough? No, it's like he's like Superman crashing through these barriers, right? For Black, Indigenous, people of color, that is something. And I take nothing away from him there.
It is to emulate his character and his example as a human being. We can strive to do that. We can choose to be good.
All right. We can choose to be good. But did he? in the end, well, not in the end, in 2003, which he acknowledged was the blot in history. But this is where I think he could have been a great American, great international hero if he had not done the bidding of George W. Bush. If he had just said, does Saddam Hussein does he have the capability of, NBC, the nuclear, biological, chemical warfare of weapons of mass destruction? If he knew the intelligence was faulty, although he said at the time, we've got the intelligence. But if he dug deeper and found out what he needed, I mean, it's one thing to just have cover and say, well, yeah, intelligence says it's all right. I won't go as deep as I have to because I know my bosses want us to go into war. So he did good for himself. He pleased his bosses. He did good for them. Did he choose to be good for us? Not just Americans, but for the Iraqis, for the people in the Middle East, for everyone throughout the world. That is something that even when you take, I mean, you get the admission by Powell that he was wrong. You got to say, all right, you could have been a 10 plus great, but when you chose to be good, you didn't follow your heart, General. You weren't the real Colin Powell. You were the good soldier. You said yes to George W. You said yes to Rumsfeld. You said yes to Dick Cheney. You said yes to the intel you were given. And you went to the UN Security Council. And then the U.S. went to war. And hundreds of thousands of people died. Did you choose to be good for everyone? Maybe you were a good soldier, and maybe you're good for the resume. But that was the character moment. And you knew it yourself. He did. He admitted it was his blot. And it will be. I'm not here to judge him. These are the facts. He's going to be judged in the afterlife. But just think how different the world would be had he chosen to be good. Had he chosen not to trust the intelligence reports that turned out to be wrong. See, the decision wasn't, oh, well, Powell could have been president. Powell could have been. That was not the decision. The decision was, what do I tell the UN Security Council? And even afterwards, when he knew, I mean, look, he's fortunate that this was the big thing, because there are other things that people have pointed to and said, what about me, like, General? And if you read my column in ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, I quote what he said there, General Powell, about My Lai, saying that, oh, My Lai, the U.S. and the Vietnamese have great relations. Yeah, that's why all those civilians were killed. So, and this is one last final word on General Powell, because it was the only thing I was thinking about as I was watching. Look, it's easy to say, oh, great man at your funeral, right? Versus the resume. Michael Powell said it himself. But at some point they merge, and they merge right there in 2003, that question about weapons of mass destruction and Saddam Hussein. I was thinking about it the whole way. And yet, at the funeral, you want to say, yeah, what a great man, what a great patriot. We remember him. We give him that pass on this day. And yet, it's not that. I mean, the consequences. You know what happened. You know what his one bad decision, his one major league bad decision did. So I just wonder, when they were singing that hymn, How Great Thou Art. I'm Filipino. I'm Filipino Catholic. How great thou art. When they sing it, they're not singing it about the guy in the casket. They're not singing it about anyone else but the man, right? But I wonder how many people after a service like that were thinking, oh, they're singing about Powell? How great thou art? No, that wasn't about Powell. Like I said, with all due respect to the general, he could have been the greatest, the absolute greatest, had he walked away, had he said, this was not worth my own self-aggrandizement to back up the Bush administration. That would have earned him a special place. And now, even he acknowledged when he was living that he lives with that blot. So, General Powell, I wish I could say rest in peace. I mean, on one hand, yes, rest in peace. But think of what he did that was just the opposite. And yet I know, as a member of the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, person of color, and I've said it, I've written 2 columns on this, he was a firster. And the first one, the initial reaction, I was just, hail to General Powell. And it's later when I just said, let's look a little closer at this. So I honor him as a person of color who did some great things, because one thing is true. He rode the elevator up, but he never forgot to send it back down. That, I will say, is true. Unlike a lot of people who are so self-serving and ride to the top, stay at the top. That was, Powell was not that guy. He was the guy who did remember. And so it's too bad that one blemish, 2003, is the thing that usually knocks him down a notch. But still, a great life and he's a great role model if you take into account that one moment in 2003. All right, so now all that's going on, and we're thinking about all these big things, these long tail kind of things. Colin Powell, what he said in 2003. Oh, it was great to see all the presidents there, except one president. You can guess which one was. Well, Jimmy Carter wasn't there. He's sick. Bill Clinton wasn't there. He's still recovering from his health scare. But 45, he wasn't there. And, who was surprised by that? Anyway, let me bring in College of Ethnic Studies professor Daniel Phil Gonzalez. Dan, how are you?
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon.
So
That
was something.
The audience.
That was something to see all the presidents together, wasn't it? A little bit, except except the
Yes,
Trump.
yes, it was, and it's too bad that Clinton and Carter weren't there. Nobody
Yeah.
missed 45.
Yeah.
Well, some people probably missed him, but I mean, it would have been incredibly hypocritical for that guy to show up. It would have been so bad on so many levels.
Yeah. But like I was reading a one headline in I think it was the Times. It said how Washington came together, and some of Washington came together.
Yes, yes.
So, but in a way, this is like old style Washington, where Democrats and Republicans fought, but in the end, you go out and you have fun together. You play together. I mean, when I first got to Washington in 1989, I was actually surprised at how everyone was friendly. It was a friendly kind of thing. It wasn't like everyone at loggerheads, trying to be as arch enemies. It was like people were they might have battled politically, but they were friendly all the other times, which is the way politics should be, right?
Civility.
Yeah.
Well, when do you think that began to happen? That
When
there's a
I
lot
got
of
there,
debating.
when I got there, 89.
You
I
were
mean, it was coincidental for me, but in 1989, that's when you had Rush Limbaugh really starting his rise. That's where the polarity and the gridlock, when the first mentions of gridlock happened between, say, 89 and 91. You know, I just think that kind of discourse was worsened by talk radio. I think, and the guy who was the master is the late Rush Limbaugh, and unfortunately, he did it and destroyed the country.
Yeah, I would agree. But what perspective was Mr. Limbaugh coming from?
Right, the right.
Yes. And what was his, what was he paralleled anywhere in the television news media?
Huh? I think he saw himself as the antidote to the liberal left wing media, as he called
Absolutely.
it, right?
Absolutely.
And so,
And, he was extremely popular.
yeah.
Um, uh, you know, at the start, do you think that he was as mendacious at the start as he was, let's say, 10 years later in
Oh,
the
no,
in the
he
late
built up.
'90s?
He built up steam. He got worse. And I think that's one of the problems with Limbaugh, that he was just like a steamroller, and then he spawned other people,
Yep.
other imitators, Glenn Beck, O'Reilly, Fox News, really essentially is an imitator. They're all
Hmm.
right wing imitators of Rush Limbaugh, and he stayed, his in his in his house in West Palm Beach, with his own media empire. But uh, I just think that it's a shame that that was the beginning, and we never have been able to right the ship. I mean, if America fell down, you know, from at that point, because of the polarizing discourse, it never has been able to come together. We've been trying to come together ever since. And now look, with this build back, I call it build back cheaper, but it's the build back better plan. We're seeing how even the Democrats have a hard time doing the right thing. To
Well, they're more than
pass,
likely to have a hard time. I mean, that's the reality of the Democratic Party is that it is a big tent party,
yeah,
and it has always had a conservative element under in that tent. They always claim. Remember the old saw? Well, I am a fiscal conservative, but a social liberal,
right,
right?
yeah,
And that's Manchin said it about himself just
yeah,
the other day.
yeah.
So I'd like to hear Kristen Cinema say something, along those lines to identify what she is.
See,
Uh,
when people hear all this stuff, they get upset because at some point they say, "Look, you're all Democrats. Get together and get this thing done," which is easier said than done. But if you believe in the principles of your party, you you don't end up sabotaging it in the way that Manchin and Cinema have, and the way the moderates have. And a couple of key Asian Americans, well, or Asian American representing type people, like Ed Case is a white guy in Hawaii, but he represents an overwhelmingly Asian American constituency.
Yeah.
He's one of the moderates who's blocking um, the passage. Stephanie Murphy, she's an Asian American from Orlando, and I imagine there's a lot of Asian Americans who see themselves as fiscal conservatives, and they aren't. They don't want to. They believe in the idea that you mentioned, the fiscal conservatism, social liberal fiscal conservative.
Yeah,
That
but do they? When you can, it's easy to say that, but you can see that by being a fiscal conservative, Mr. Manchin, and to a certain extent, a lesser extent actually, Senator Sinema, that being a fiscal conservative often puts you on the wrong side of social liberalism.
yeah,
Because liberal Democrats, liberal and progressive Democrats, even radical left Democrats, right? They're interested in the welfare of the poorest among us. They're interested in the working class. And they look at things from an economic and a socio political point of view. It's never just politics as usual. What we often refer to as traditional politics. Some of what you were talking about, like before you got to D.C., we could all depend on people understanding what the rules of civility were.
yeah,
Even in D.C., you know, there was much less absolutism, right? And that absolutism came from the right. And one of the things that really bothers me, how do you feel about, one of the things that I ask students about, what are false equivalencies, right?
yeah,
Like both sides do it. Okay, so let's just pick mendacity, lying about public events,
yeah,
whether or not they even occur,
yeah.
and then they say both sides do it. You
Yeah.
know
Well,
what?
that's one of the things about now. One of the issues that the Republicans want to get at the Democrats for is, voting rights, because they fear that the elections need to be tightened up. They're corrupt. There's something wrong with them. But no one's complaining after Tuesday. No one's complaining about the elections. No one's complaining about election frauds. That's
Okay, let
probably,
me do that. Let me do that. It was rigged.
yeah,
It
yeah.
was rigged. McAuliffe should have won.
That was
I want a
one
recount.
that was one of the biggest takeaways from Tuesday's election, that on the Day of the Dead, no dead people voted.
Yeah.
On the Day of the Dead, there was no election fraud.
I love it. I love it. That's really good. You know
That's
what?
one
I'm gonna borrow that. I'm gonna use it in my classes. That's
well,
really good.
well, I think it happens every 7 years. The Day
It's
of the
one
Dead.
heck of an irony.
Yeah, the Day of the Dead and an election day on the November 2nd coincide. But really, it's one of those things where no one's complaining about it now, and people should be smart enough to understand that.
Oh, don't go there. Don't go
Well,
with
they
the
should be
smart
smart
part.
enough to know that, hey, look, there's nothing wrong with. We know there's nothing wrong with our elections. There's only things wrong with the people who run for office in elections. That's what's wrong. It's not the
Well,
elections; it's the
well,
people.
that's going to change, though. Have you seen how many election officials are resigning their positions?
Yeah, they're resigning because they're getting harassed. They're getting,
Harassed. They're getting death threats. That's pretty
yeah,
serious. That's the highest level of harassment other than actual physical assault.
yeah. Well, being a person of color, you should know this too. That you say something or do something that is that people disagree with, you're going to get some kind of threat. You're going to get at least hate mail. that is not maybe to the level of death threat. That's maybe not quite a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. It's probably more like a 3. But you know, you go out there and you say something that is going to be disagreeable by some, to some people. You're going to get hate mail at the very least. And but I think we got to see the voting rights, all the
Yeah.
reforms to
Yes.
voting
Yes.
rights
Yeah.
happen to make sure people vote. Because if the Republicans' voting rights, it's not really a voting rights; it's really a take rights away bill that the Republicans want. They want to restrict voting, but the John Lewis,
They've already succeeded at gerrymandering in the red states.
yeah.
You know,
Well, they've done that.
several states that are sort of swing states or blue states traditionally have passed measures that take the formation of districts, right, voting districts, and precincts. They've taken it out of the hands of the politicians themselves and rather put it into the hands of commissions that are theoretically at least balanced
Right.
party, in terms of partisan representation. California, I don't know. We That's another thing we should talk about sometime. But
Yeah. Well,
uh,
see, this is the thing. I've always questioned whether or not, uh, you know, we've always gotten away with the fact that our system has been really precarious, but nothing really bad has happened. And now
right,
people realize just how
how
precarious.
vulnerable it
Yeah,
is. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
I mean,
extremely vulnerable. One of the things I wanted to talk about was how do you feel about the way that the Democrats deal with the constant aggression by the Republicans? It's constant and it's simple. One of the things that I think is appealing about the Republican strategy to people who have tendencies towards really conservative thinking, right? I'm not talking about the branding of conservatism as it's gotten so twisted lately, right? But real conservative thinking. Do you connect racism with conservatism?
uh, generally, I would have to say I do. I, I,
Now,
I do.
we're
And,
talking about conservatism in the traditional sense rather than the way it's been misused and abused recently.
well, you look at conservatives like, say, there's room in the Big Tent for Clarence Thomas and Condoleezza Rice, and there's room for Black and Latinx uh, Republicans. So being a conservative doesn't necessarily mean you're racist, but generally the racists I know tend to be conservative and not liberal. I mean, well, name some liberal racists who are public about it. I mean, I'm sure there's some liberal racists
I'm sure there are.
who
Yeah,
aren't
there's
public
degrees
about
of racism, right?
it.
And academics, particularly in ethnic studies, like to look at people who commit what we refer to as liberal racism. You know, um, the helping hand attitude.
Oh
The
yeah.
community messiah attitude, right? These people have been oppressed for so long that they don't have the ability, right,
Yeah,
to address these issues on their own.
but still though, it is a kind of racism. But
Yes,
on the one hand, they are addressing some problems of some people to a degree, right? I mean, it's versus the outright racism of conservatives that say, take away the green cards, take away the health care, take away, these immigrants are taking money out of our funds for, if they're undocumented, they shouldn't, that's
right,
usually conservatives saying
right.
that.
No, it's very clear, and most of my colleagues would tend to agree with you on the issue of liberal racism. One of my past chairs, decades ago, when I confronted him with that question, what about liberal racism and degree, and how do we deal with that internal to, let's say, party politics and local politics in San Francisco, particularly? And he said, "Okay, liberal racism." He goes, "What would you rather be, patted on the head or kicked in the groin?"
Oh, that's it. There's no
Which I
third
said, well,
choice.
which one's liberal? Which one's the liberal?
Well, uh, you're still living. I, I guess that's one of the things. Hey,
Yeah.
well,
uh,
look. So, what do we do though with
that there
Man-
we go.
what do we do with
That's
Manchin and Cinema?
that's the question.
Is that they're
Well, you can't.
against liberal racism?
In Manchin's case, right? He's the best you're going to get out of West Virginia.
Yeah,
Okay. He made an excellent point when he said, if you want to understand West Virginia, take a look at how the vote went in Southwest Virginia, right? Bordering, of course, West Virginia. And he said, if you understand that, then you understand what I'm doing when I vote the way that I'm going. Now, I don't believe all of that. Okay,
yeah,
I don't believe all of that because I think a lot of West Virginians would be in favor of the itemized elements, right, of the
yeah,
social infrastructure project.
yeah.
Okay.
I think that's true. But here's you identified a point here. Here's Manchin. Really, he's not talking about the people in that Southwest Virginia area and bordering his West Virginia area. He's really talking about himself. He's talking about his self-interest, and he's talking about, if
Yes,
I want to get elected again, I've got to be this way because I'm
because I
not
got
going
to
to
get
get
this money.
elected. I'm not going to get elected again if I vote for, Build Back Better the way it is now. And if
Well,
I
I
would,
think he knows that he's constantly at risk, right? Just as
well,
being a Democrat in West Virginia, and I think he's been padding his retirement fund,
oh, a lot with,
the whole
yeah,
time.
with,
He's got tons of money, and how much of that is really going to campaign finance, right? And how
yeah,
much of it, because he owns stocks and bonds. He's in immediate conflict of interest.
yeah,
You
and well, he's in the back pocket of the oil and gas interests of his state, and
know,
when and say,
Cole,
so here's a thing that really bothers me when I was talking about Powell earlier, Colin Powell and his funeral, and being
yeah,
good for the people and internationally, or being good for yourself, right? For the resume or for the funeral, for the eulogy, and really, Colin Powell, when he made his big mistake, he did it for his resume and not for all the people. And at some point, when you're in politics, and I think this is the problem, you're into self-preservation more than you are for the preservation of humankind, for the goodness of fellow citizens. You're making decisions for yourself, for your ability to stay in office,
right,
and that should be, look, you should be able to make the tough choice that is not self-serving. Now, as I say that, people say, what the hell are you talking about, Emil? Why
right.
would I vote against my own interest? Because it's right. Now, who does that? Not many people can. And because not many people can't, if you do, you are a saint. But if you can't, then you're just like all the rest of them. And that's why Powell, as great as some people say he was, there was that one blot, he even admitted it, that makes him not quite saint level.
Yeah,
He
there's not going to be very many people that answer to that standard. In fact, I
well,
can't think of any right now. I
well,
can't think.
they're not in politics. If they,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can't be in politics
I
if you
think I
are.
think the closest you get, if you want to look at people in the presidency or in the, high positions, like Powell, I would say the closest you're going to get is Jimmy Carter, and he was a one-term president, and they went after him because he made a statement about. They went after him for two big things. One, he said, "I have lusted after other women in my heart." Remember that?
Yeah, I do remember that.
And
I
he
was
made it
hoping you were
sound
going to
like
say that.
he committed rape in full public view, you know.
Yeah.
And then they also went after him because the rescue attempt
Oh yeah.
of the Iranian hostages failed so miserably.
See,
Right?
isn't it funny that not many people of a certain age would remember that, but not many people recall Jimmy Carter, except that they remember he built houses. Jimmy Carter built houses.
He still does.
He still does. But I met him. I went to a Sunday school lesson that he gave. I like Jimmy Carter, and you're right. He's probably the only one who you can say reaches that standard of who's willing to vote against one's self-interest. And this is why it's important, because there are members of the electorate who will vote against their self-interest
And they do it all the time.
unwittingly, right?
Well, we can. I don't know. I don't know that it's completely unwitting. Okay, because there's a portion of what they believe that is being addressed by the candidates and by the issues. You know, the ballot issues that they vote on.
Yeah, but
But
when a
but
but
the
when a
question is whether or not those representations are accurate and truthful.
yeah,
So they tend to buy into things because they believe that they have a strong set of values, but they have a very simplistic understanding of how the candidates and how ballot measures are being addressed or are actually functions of the values that are being asserted, right?
yeah.
So they can fall victim very easily to salesmanship, right?
Well,
It's marketing. It comes down to marketing. I mean, one of the guys whose opinions I really value is Donnie Deutsch, and what's his thing, right? Is marketing.
yeah,
It's labels, you
yeah.
know.
He's a marketer, and I
Yeah,
mean, no, I don't even. I think he's more conservative than liberal.
I think he is too.
I think I don't even, but I don't really know. I just know that he's more marketer. He's more capitalist than not.
Sure,
And
sure.
this is the other thing. If you're into the mainstream capitalism, then you are going to succeed to the degree that you are, and maybe you're all in. Yeah, you're going to succeed. If you're not, if you're, and you could be a worker and still believe in capitalism, but you're a worker, and those people do not succeed. Unfortunately, I don't. I mean that's just my opinion, and I think that so that means that well, who's going to speak for the workers?
That's right.
Someone like Sanders, who's an independent, who's a democratic socialist. I mean, that's the movement that is really going to be liberating for a lot of workers here, and will prevent people from voting against their self interest
Yeah, but the
because
problem the problem is union leadership,
well, that is
right?
a
The union leadership are also, many of them are bought and paid for the same way that politicians are bought and paid for.
well, I hate to admit it, but I think you're right. I mean, that's the problem with everyone who rises. They have to deal with a level of corruption.
Right.
But some people will say, "Oh, that's acceptable. Everyone does it all the time," or
No,
and
it's not.
see,
It's when people make those kinds of assessments,
yeah, and
they're already on the road to voting against self interest, right?
yeah, and
You
then
know?
also you take Trump. Trump has brought the whole thing that we see in third world countries, where where
Yeah, corruption.
the people, pass some money along, they do
Sure.
favors. It happens a lot in the Philippines, right? In the
Yep.
Philippines, it happens a lot, and it's a part of the political culture, corruption. And in a lot of third world countries, that's the way it works. Bring some extra dollars, so you grease a palm, right?
Well, see, the interesting thing is that on an international scale, you can understand corruption when you look at the disparity, right,
Mm,
between the majority of the population and the wealthier political and economic elites. What
right.
is interesting about the United States is that we're still probably the richest country in the world, okay?
Yeah,
And yet you see the same kind of parallel corruption occurring here, okay?
yeah.
So why does that happen?
Well,
You
it does.
know,
It doesn't happen as much. I mean, you can't go say to a like some regular bureaucratic office and slip someone a 10 or 20 or whatever and expect better service.
okay, so it doesn't happen at that level quite
Yeah,
regularly, right?
yeah. But look, corruption does happen in American politics, and we have disgraced politicians who
Sure, and obviously it has to do with the regional culture or local culture, whether or
yeah,
not that corruption occurs.
yeah,
And all you got to do is take a look at Arizona
oh yeah,
and the kind of court decisions that come out of there, and also the behavior of people that were pardoned by
yeah,
Mr. Trump, including the former sheriff Arpaio, right?
Yeah.
Uh, High
Well,
level corruption. Judges, constables, prison guards,
yeah.
bought and paid for by the private industrialized prison complex.
See, now all of this uh, just does not. If people who are like outside of politics and they listen to this and they say, "Ah, this is why I hate, politics. This is why I keep an arm's length from all that because
And
you know
by doing
they
that, they permit this corruption to
right
occur.
they take themselves out of the game, and that's why when I said vote, remember you have the power. They're working for you. They are the public servants. You may not care about politics. You may not want to run for office, and in fact, it's all right if you don't run for office, but the people with the power are the ones with the vote, and
Right.
you vote. And that's why it's all important when they either redesign district lines or they
Yep.
try to take the power of the vote away, or you know simple things like same day registration, all day voting, weekend voting, mail in vote. When they start
Making
doing
voting
those,
a holiday,
yeah,
making voting day a holiday.
yeah, and
It's a holiday in most other democratic societies, and yeah, but on a recent couple of years ago, my wife and I took a trip through Spain and Portugal,
right,
and and we talked to our guides and our drivers, and people casually on the street and restaurants, and I asked them, how is it? The tax system. People complain that it's too much, and they say, well, actually, the medical assistance that we get and the high quality of education that we get that's available to everybody, that stuff is really good. And I said, well, we've been driving through your country, and the freeways are in excellent condition. And they said, well, why do you notice that? And I said, well, I'm from California, and the freeways, there are areas of the freeways that are in horrible condition,
yeah, yeah,
and they're not in good repair. I gave them the example of the quake
oh
of
yeah,
'89, and how all kinds of highways were injured in the quake, and money was set aside. We had a big bundle of federal money to repair the Dole approach, right, to the Golden Gate Bridge, the San Francisco side, right, of the approach to the Golden Gate Bridge. And it took 10 years to just even get started on working on that. It wasn't until the early 2000s that they started doing a meaningful burden of work on that approach. And
yeah.
it just, it's been less than 10 years, right? I mean, it's been since last decade
But this is
that you could actually trust that approach. And
well, this
they
is
did a great job. But
yeah,
look how long, and the money was there from the start, and
yeah,
it took forever for the locals to decide how and when they were going to do it, and it ended up doubling the cost.
yeah.
So we didn't have, we had the federal money sitting there. It wasn't garnering the kind of interest, right? They probably had it in a regular bank account. Can you imagine it?
Yeah, but that this is the problem. It's like the feds have the money, they have the purse strings, but it's up to the locals to distribute.
That's
And
right.
sometimes that kind of bureaucracy ends up, you end up with a situation like, oh, a thing that should take, uh, you know, 4 years takes 10 years. So
Which underscores the position that both of us are taking, is that even if you dislike politics, you have to understand that your personal
oh yeah,
quality of life is going to be affected by that. And yet that's why, from a practical perspective, you really ought to know what's going on.
oh
Study
yeah.
the stuff and go ahead and vote. You gotta vote.
So Dan, let's talk about Build Back Better because there are a couple of things that really affect people when they talk about 1.75, 1.85 trillion, six
Right.
trillion.
Yeah.
But see, the thing is,
It's not
it's
the
road,
money. It's about what actually happens, right?
right?
What's going to get done.
But it's also there's money for roads and bridges, but some of
Yes.
the other things that
That's
they
the
can do,
hardware side.
yeah. But on the soft side, there's money for immigration, and this is something that um, should concern.
Resonate with Asians and
Yeah,
particularly with Chinese and Filipinos, since we're the
yeah,
biggest we're the
yeah,
biggest groups
yeah.
still
So
immigrating even today.
right. So we're also talking about money for DACA, right?
Right.
The immigration.
Absolutely.
So
Which the Republicans, many Republicans say they're in favor of that.
yeah. Well, they have to. They need the workers. I mean, the worker shortage should make people realize that this is why we need our immigrants, right?
Yeah, but what they need, what they really want is they want white people.
Well, the
They,
brown,
they want white immigrants, or at least somebody from Europe. If they're
yeah.
not white,
Well, they
then
make it.
European of some sort.
Yeah, that's why, and that's why some were big on the Russian immigrants for a while, especially in San Francisco. It
Yeah.
seemed.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So, all right. So, tell me, what do you think's going to happen with this vote on the Build
I think
Back
it'll
Better?
get passed. I think it'll get passed. I think
But
the
not this week.
progression.
Not over
No,
the
no, not this week.
not over the next 48
She
hours.
choked again. They choked again because the so-called moderate Democrats.
Yeah.
You know what? Manchin described himself as a conservative,
Oh, that's
and,
good.
and but
He is.
most of the media keeps referring to these people as moderates, and they're not moderate. Okay.
No, yeah,
Uh, Once again, this is one of the things that I discuss in my class is that
yeah,
this whole view of what constitutes liberal and conservative is skewed way over to the right, so that something can be actually moderate right, and center right, and people think it's liberal, right?
yeah.
It's crazy. It's really crazy.
So, when
So
do you think it's going to get passed? Next week, sometime.
no, probably closer to Thanksgiving.
Yeah, they've
Yeah,
asked for the score from the Congressional
CBO.
Budget Office. Yeah,
Yeah,
and, like, I don't know, like that really is just a delaying tactic.
it is. It
That's
isn't.
all it is, because
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%.
they don't need the score. I mean, at some point you say, look, let's pass it, get it done. We got the votes if
Yeah,
everyone
no,
stays in line.
they can, but no, actually, procedurally, they do have to have the score. But you're right that it's a delaying tactic.
Yeah, I mean, but they could also say, look, we're all in agreement. We need to do something. Let's come back with something. Boom, let's pass it. They
Yep,
wanted to
yep,
separate it now.
yep.
So look, it's never done until you start seeing someone cut a check saying, "Here, this is for your bridge, and this is
That's
for
right.
your workers." And so,
That's absolutely
and
right.
we may not see that for a while, but this is the process anyway. So, Dan, one last question before we go, and that is, we got all this COVID stuff. The five through 11 vaccine is going to be available. We've
Got a
got,
COVID pill.
yeah, they got the pill, and I see people on screen at places. They're not wearing masks. Some are, some aren't. Indoors, like at the funeral, at the Powell funeral, they
Yeah,
were wearing masks. Okay, for the most part. Yeah, I think most of them were, but
yeah.
I still think, is this me being pre-agoraphobic by not wanting to go out, and I'll go to the grocery store, I'll mask up, but I will not take unnecessary trips anywhere. I will not. If I don't have to go somewhere, I'm not going to go. And I haven't, I like to do these stage performances, these shows. um I had an offer to do one. I'm not going to go. I don't think I'm going to go on stage yet. Is December too soon? I think December is going to be cold, and it could be the worst. It could
Yeah, no, no. You want to wait until after the winter because I believe that there's a danger of a surge during the
Yeah,
winter
you do.
because
All right. So
people are going to get together, and you have a lot of people who. I mean, it's a good. I don't know how fast the FDA is going to sanction the pill, but I'm glad that it's available or that it will be available because I think a lot of people are going to contract COVID during the winter, and
yeah,
so then we'll be in danger again because the kids are going to be going back to school. Uh, Most of 30% of the parents say they will never have their child vaccinated. Okay,
yeah,
so that means that masks are going to be around, in school districts that aren't besieged by people who are, threatening them, death threats, right, at the school board level. You notice also on the right that they're running for school board.
Yeah.
A lot of heavy Trumpers are realizing, you can get elected if you just don't talk about Trump.
Yeah. Well, also
You
look.
can take on hard positions that are Trump identical, but don't mention Trump, and you can get elected.
But a lot of people realize
So that's what's
also.
going on. So we're going to be threatened all the way around, and I think there's going to be a surge. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think you're agoraphobic at all. I was going to
I
say, well, I'm going to have to jump in the same bus as you because I feel the same exact way.
yeah.
You
Well,
know, I
thank
don't
you.
mind paying for the service of people delivering our groceries. I
Well,
gladly do that.
I still go out to I go out to the grocery store, just not that often. But I know that look, if a
Oh,
pill is
I just
available.
lost your sound.
Oh, how about now? I'm
I don't know
on.
what's going on. I didn't do anything on my end.
Oh,
Let me check.
I'm still pumping
It's
out
probably
sound.
on my end.
Yeah, I think it's
Wow,
on
how did
your
that
end.
happen?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let me go check.
All right. Well, look, Dan, that's it for today. I mean, it's a eh, okay. Dan is gone because his unfortunately. I was going to tell a joke about the pill. I said, "Look, I don't mind if I get COVID. I just mind if I get pregnant. That's all." Anyway, that's Professor Daniel Phil Gonzalez. We lost sound, but he'll be back again. He's a regular guest. I like having Dan around because Dan is he's one of the originals at the College of Ethnic Studies, San Francisco State University. He knows politics. He knows Asian American studies. He knows Filipino American studies. He knows it, and it's an honor to have him come and share with us here on Emil Muck's Takeout. So I think it's time for more music. So thank you again for being with us all this week. What a week! I mean, we had an election, as I like to say. Hey, it was a Day of the Dead, and no dead people voted. What are these people talking about elections being rigged? Dead people voting. It doesn't happen. So, and yet, the Republicans are going to fight the Democrats on voting rights, on election integrity. Not an issue. It's not an issue, but they're making it an issue. Don't buy into it. Don't buy into the big lie that someone else won last November. That a year ago, someone else. No, the real president is in now. Don't buy that January 6th was just like a walk in the park. It wasn't. Notice they got that. There was a white female realtor from Texas. She got the book thrown at her. And it was right. She said, "Look, I'm not going to go in jail because I'm white." Well, you're going to jail, honey. Oops, I shouldn't have said honey. That's kind of like a sexist thing. But she's going to jail. So don't buy that. January 6th happened. And let's hope the January 6th committee does what it needs to do to expose and to punish those people who are perpetrators of that. That's a blot on our American democracy. That was a failed coup. And it was staged, well, all the fingers are pointing to the highest office in the land, the Trump administration. Anyway, so what a week. And then we end up with one of my favorite topics, General Colin Powell, a man who I praised uh, really, I, I, I overly praised perhaps when I first heard of his death, but you look at the record and you say, you know, he was okay when it came down to making the tough decision. He could not make the decision that would help all of mankind. He made the decision that helped his bosses and himself. That's a problem. But something to think about. Certainly as a BIPOC, a Black Indigenous person of color. Got to honor him for being a barrier smasher, right? For all of us. I mean, he's a generation ahead of me. So those of us who came after stand on his shoulders. I mean, he broke barriers, no doubt. But it says something about people who rise. They pay a price. And the price is, were they absolutely authentic or just authentic enough? You know? I mean, you saw parts of it in the eulogies today where people talked about his heart, talked about how fun he was, talked about, okay. But he was not truly authentic to the absolute truth about that UN statement, 2003. And that's going to be the big blot for Colin Powell. All right. So, hey, thank you. Thank you for being here. Back again next week. We're here Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific Live. As I like to say, hey, be here, bang the gong now. Come join me. You can watch this show on emilguillermo.media on Facebook. The old metaverse. I don't know what the new metaverse would be. I guess we'd have goggles and we'd be like waving at each other in real life, but it would look like we're really like boxing. I don't know. Who knows what a metaverse is? amok.com is where I post this stuff. Yeah, I post this stuff. amok.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Emil Amok. See more at amok.com. I post the recordings and look for live replays throughout the weekend on my YouTube channel, Emil Guillermo, YouTube. Don't forget to read me, for you readers out there, at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. aldef.org/blog. Check that out. Always fun when people say, oh, I heard him talk about this, and then they read it. ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. So if you've made it this far, you know that this is our time together, right? See, now something happened to my screen here. Oh, I just had to slide it down. Okay. So if you made it this far, this is the time we get kind of meditatey. Yeah, where we talk about how, hey, don't forget the bishop, I think, or whoever was the presider at the end of the Powell funeral. He said, don't forget self-love. Self-love. That means forgive yourself. It's all right. I think Powell did. Powell owned up to it. I think he couldn't have lived with himself if he didn't have self-love in the end. He had enough self-love. You don't become a 4-star general without having an adequate amount of self-love. But for those of us who aren't 4 stars, don't forget the self-love, the self-hug. You belong. You're worth it. Love yourself first. And then love the world. And they'll love you back. So till next time, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be happy. And may you live with ease. Till next time, Emil Guillermo, Mahal Kita.